Well, Daryl, thanks for sitting down again with me and picking up on the discussion around your whole Redemption Church and its story throughout history and time. And when you walk into the lobby of the church here in Jasper, and on your satellite campuses, and that may not be the right term, but in Tell City and in Lagodi, it's very clear the love people theme, the mission that's there in that aspect. And in a previous message and conversation we had, you talked a lot about how people have played a key part in where the church is today, but even before, when all this was in the planning stages a bit. And I know you're just excited. And every time you and I talk, whether it's over lunch or just off to the side with a little sidebar about all the people and trying to keep those vast amounts of individuals that God has brought to you in the church, you're just excited about every one of them. Talk a little bit about how that's come together, first of all, in the whole. Then let's talk a little bit by breaking down some of the parts and pieces and get into some of the individuals who have made a difference and where and how.
Well, we talk all the time about relationships here, how everything's relationships. I often say it's not what you know, it's who you know, so to speak. And the reality is I come from a background of loving team sports, playing team sports, coaching team sports. And in team sports, it's not mostly about the individuals, it's about the pieces coming together. And church is probably even a greater part of that. Paul compares us to a body, and you got hands and arms and eyes and all those different pieces. And some of them are more visible, but they're the ones that aren't as visible are no less valuable. I mean, and you think about the organs that you never see that are crucial to the body. And so we just really believe that within the church and have had that as a part of Redemption's DNA from the get-go. The whole love people thing, you're right, it is a big part of that. And so that's piece one. Piece two, though, is that God is ultimately in control. We believe in his sovereignty, that he knows what we need before we even need it, before we know what we need. And so what you see is that all through the history of the church universally, like from the day of Pentecost on, and to the church as in locally, through redemption, God has sent the right people with the right gifts and talents and the right heart at the right time. One of the greatest examples of that I remember, I always had a vision for what I thought worship should be like in a church like ours, because we said from the get-go, to reach people that are not being reached, you got to do things that are not being done. You got to approach things differently. And I had been and visited lots of churches in larger areas that did it, more of a contemporary worship. And contemporary is a term that's been hijacked and means so many different things to different people. But what I meant is something more on the lines of worship that you would hear on your local radio station stylistically, as opposed to the traditional organ, traditional piano only approach to worship. And so I knew that I wanted that to be a part of what Redemption was. I felt like God leading us that way, but didn't have a lot of people to do that. Me and my brother kind of did that early on, but that was not our calling in life to be the worship leaders in that way. And we brought in some people and filled in here and there. And I had some great ladies who led worship via tracks to try to get that in motion. Some of them have moved on to different stages of life, different areas of the country. Some of them are still here, but they took part in helping us get there and that, and spent a lot of time with that. But I knew I wanted like a band and guitar feel, because that really was not done on any level at that time in our area, in our region. And so I just, had been praying about that, been thinking about that. And so we were over at the Cathy Lane warehouse where our first building that we purchased was. And we were having services, and I kind of shared from the stage that idea. And there was a guy who had been coming regularly, had moved up here for his job, and his name was Daniel Ross. And Daniel, on the way out, said, well, you mentioned wanting a guitar player. I play a little guitar. I said, oh, you do? And I think if I wasn't afraid of running him off, I would have grabbed him and hugged him in that moment. But I didn't. And so we exchanged information and phone numbers, I think, at that point. And then I brought him into the fold with those ladies and some of the others who were kind of planning worship and leading, and slowly but surely worked him into that, and he started taking more leadership role in that until we started putting a band around him, which was the obviously the forerunner to what you see today, where we have multiple bands at multiple different campuses with several distinct styles, different, each one just a little bit different, that would match some of the styles you would hear in everyday music. And so that was really just the first example of me praying and wanting something and God knowing. I mean, there's literally no reason why Daniel Ross was in Jasper, Indiana. I mean, he came for a job, but it was a job that he probably planned to stay for a year or so and move on because he's from a different part of the country, from the Nashville area. And yet God knew I was here, and he brought him here. And he has been and still is a crucial part of our worship identity in terms of leading that team and leading our worship staff and volunteers and helping put that distinct style around us and even writing some of our worship songs that we do. And just amazing to see. That's just an example. I didn't know Daniel. I didn't even know he had a musical background. And yet, God, and it wasn't just his music, but he also at that time, he worked for the Du Bois County Herald. He had the journalism and the page design experience there, that he became our first webmaster, our communications pastor, all those things in one, and that was just a God thing. And so that's an example of that. There was also Gene and Sharon Nycom. Gene was one of our first elders, one of our founding elders. Just the wisdom and knowledge of Du Bois County and people, and the way it worked. So Gene showed up very first week. I reached out to them. I heard they might be interested. Reached out to them the very first week. Reached out to him, and they showed up, and then just played a crucial part all the way through the leadership. Sharon was our first church treasurer, a part of helping make building decisions, and teaching me the value of being good stewards, but not being cheap. Gene brought that level, if you're going to buy carpet, you need to spend good money on carpet because it'll last for, that just little things that I would have never thought of that he brought to the table. And then when we started thinking about the process of building our first building, God had brought us a general contractor by the name of Randy Berg, and Randy had come to a new relationship with the Lord. He came from a different background, from a religious background, less that relationship, but he found that relationship with Jesus specifically through redemption, through CCJ at the time. Just got on fire for the Lord, him and his wife, just really crucial. And his expertise in helping us design the building, our first location specifically, and then our second build on to that. He was just such a crucial part, and still to this day, actively involved anytime we do something facilities-wise, and became a great leader in the church. And God had brought him at just the right time. There was no reason other than God put him here. And so we utilized his expertise, and he connected us with people. And, you just think about all those kinds of people that came, teachers who come and helped us do our first Christian education program with me and my wife. And my wife had never had any experience doing that, but yet she was able to do that because we partnered with people that taught school. And Jeff Kirby, who is one of our elders currently, has been an elder off and on through the history of the church. He was an educator. He was good in technology, and he came along and became one of my first leaders, helped me lead the youth group in the early days before we could hire youth staff to do that. Just so many people and I hate to start mentioning names. I need to write a bunch down before we record too much because I'll forget some crucial people. But the point is, God keeps bringing the right people at the right time. Financially, God has sent us the right people who knew how to help us understand the budgets and things like that. The two of the biggest people that was as influential as ever that God brought at the right time, Kevin and Charlotte Chastain. A lot of people may know that name. A lot of you may not know that name, but Kevin and Charlotte. I knew who Charlotte was my whole life. She grew up in French Lick, and she was a plant manager for one of the Kimball Electronic plants. Very organized, very tough, organized. Don't mess with Charlotte. She knew how to run things, and her boyfriend at the time, they weren't yet married. Kevin worked as with Kimball Electronics. He was very organized, a global quote manager or specialist for them, and so anyway, they showed up one Easter Sunday. Charlotte's mom was a part of our church, and she said, "You need to come." They showed up and met him, and Kevin had not been a part of a church he grew up in a little Christian church, and he hadn't been a part of church in probably 20 years. And he caught fire and, recommitted his life. Charlotte recommitted, and the first thing they volunteered was Vacation Bible School. They were part of our Vacation Bible School team, and they just started getting more and more involved. Well, it came to a time where this church was outgrowing my capabilities in terms of organizationally. It may be a shock for some of you, but I'm not a super organized person at all. Vision, I can cast vision, love on people, I can do that. Preach, sometimes I can do that. But as far as like being the organizational structure side of things, we were kind of outgrowing my capabilities, and I needed some help. And so I hired Charlotte to be my office manager. She left her a really good job at Kimball Electronics to come run my office, to really be my kind of chief of staff, kind of keep me straight, help us organizationally. And Kevin, at the same time, we had done their marriage. We'd married them, and they were together. He became then the leader of my leadership team. Later, he'd become an elder, and he was kind of truly the chairman of the board, so to speak. He's the guy that when we had a meeting to decide to do things, he would put in red, well, it wasn't done, and it's Kevin's job to do this, and he'll report back by such and such time. Just that organizational structure that we didn't have. We were I flew by the seat of my pants most of the time, and they brought that to us, and all of a sudden now, we had doubled in size, and we were going to be spinning out of control if we didn't have that, and they brought that structure and that leadership regularity and organizational piece. Again, God knew they needed to be there. He brought them. They had been out of church for years, and God brought them at just the right time, and they renewed their relationship with the Lord and got involved with that. And so those are just pieces of people that God brought at just the right time, and it's amazing that you look at a church our size, a couple thousand people, and think about the hundreds of servants that have been in their place that God brought at just the right time, at just the right place. So,
as you're talking, something related to me. Recently, my wife and I took a lot of old VHS tapes and a lot of old beta tapes, and we were sold at the Old Sound of Music downtown Jasper that beta was going to be the thing in the 1980s, so we've got beta tapes, right? Well, beta went kaput and VHS took off, but nonetheless, 35, 40-year-old tapes we've been digitizing, and as we're reviewing the digital forms as we receive back, one very recently to the time we're recording this, had our youngest son just 9 months old and our oldest son 8.5 years old, but it was with her mom over Christmas, and her mom went home to be with the Lord just a few years after that piece, and what sense I received and my wife has received is just God not only brings people into our lives, but there's that reminder of legacy of those individuals.
Yeah.
And I sense you have the same thing sitting here 20 plus years, 22 years after launching what was CCJ, originally Christian Church of Jasper, now the Redemption Story. And I'm sure you have moments to where those individuals who may, perhaps are no longer involved with the church, or God has taken home to be with Him, they're still impacting you in the church today.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you think about that legacy and that, you mentioned your youngest son. The very early days of the church, we were meeting in a movie theater. We had a relationship through school. I substitute taught, and he would ride down with us to church, help me set up, and be a part, him and a couple other guys down through the years, and you see that. But yeah, and so many of them have went on to be with the Lord. I think about Phil Dawkins, Dr. Dawkins. I mean, he was such a crucial part in the early days of the church. Him and Randy Norris taught our junior and senior high Sunday school class. He was a part of our leadership team. We called it the servants team. Phil was a big part of that. When I was going to make a decision for the physically for the church, like location where we moved, even to this current location at our Jasper campus, I would always talk to those guys because they had such wisdom and they had ran businesses very well of their own and been successful. And Randy and Phil were always a part of, I relied on their wisdom a lot, and they obviously gave of their time, their talents, and their treasures to this church. And I miss Phil still to this day. It's like sometimes I'd like to, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Just such a crucial part. And Sharon Nykum, I mentioned earlier, Regine, she's went on to be with the Lord. And, I think about Betty Mills. Betty had grew up in a Logodi Christian church and moved to Jasper in her retirement days. She was a school secretary at the Logodi High School, really good friends with Jack Butcher, and I would go see her every Wednesday, and she would, donate. She donated to the church. She helped the church. She would just encourage me every week, and it was just, she was such a crucial part of helping form who I am and there. And then she was the first funeral we ever had at Redemption at CCJ at the time, or Kathy Lane building. So I think of all those people down through the years. I think of people who came to be a part of the church and they've went on, and now I see like their kids or grandkids coming here, maybe didn't at then. And it's just, you think about that legacy, the way it lives on, generational impact that's happening. It's neat to look back and to see. I hope to, we're approaching 23 years of existence here next month. I hope maybe on year 25 we do really, really historical look back and celebrate people and what God's done, because there's so many. You just see that all throughout the Bible, that Paul even uses the example that some will plant, some will water, others will get to harvest it. And I feel like I get to be a part of the harvest from hundreds of people who've been planting. Even before we existed, people pouring into my life and preparing the way for this. It's an honor and a privilege to get to be a part of it.
Well, I appreciate the passion that you present, but that passion's not only Daryl's passion. That passion is truly the legacy of the people that have been involved in planting the seeds, the incubation, creation of the ideation of CCJ, now Redemption, and now to where we are nearly 23 years later from that piece. Let's pick up more on the legacy aspect of the Redemption story in our next episode.
Okay, sounds like a good plan.